Ahmed, a man who worked at the local well, was known by everyone in his village as a devout and religious man. He often claimed that he was a learned scholar of the Quran and that his life was devoted to prayer and devotion to God. He introduced himself as a sheikh, a respected title for someone considered to be both wise and spiritual. People in the village, admiring his confidence, believed him. They would often praise him, calling him holy and virtuous. They thought, Ahmed is a sheikh. He must be a good man. The villagers looked up to him and even sought his advice, assuming he was the source of divine wisdom. But Ahmed's public persona was far from the truth. Beneath his claims of holiness, he was actually a manipulator, a man driven more by personal desire than genuine piety. Despite his outward appearance as a religious man, he had a hidden agenda. He worked at the well, pulling water for the villagers, but instead of focusing on his duties or truly serving others, he used his position to further his own interests. He was not truly dedicated to the spiritual life he portrayed. Rather, he was a trickster, using the title of sheikh to gain trust and manipulate others. The reality was that Ahmed was skilled in deception, hiding his true nature behind the mask of a holy man. His actions were driven not by faith or devotion, but by his own desires. His reputation as a righteous man was simply a facade, a role he played well to get what he wanted from the people around him. Every day he would go through the motions of being a good, religious man, but inside he was a different person. The well, which should have been a place of service and humility, became a stage for Ahmed to perform his tricks. The villagers never saw through his act, so they continued to praise him, believing in the image he projected. To them, he was the perfect example of a pious man, but they were blind to the truth. In reality, Ahmed's life was far from holy. His mind was not on his spiritual duties, but on using his position to take advantage of others. His false reputation as a religious man was his tool to gain influence and manipulate people, all the while hiding his true character. Ahmed, who worked at the well, had always been known to the villagers as a man of faith. He was the one people came to when they needed water, advice, or simply a kind word. But there was one person in particular who caught his eye, a woman who came to the well every day to fill her water pot. She was beautiful, with a graceful manner that made her stand out among the other villagers. Ahmed, despite his so-called holiness, couldn't help but be captivated by her charm. However, the woman was already married and had a son, which didn't deter Ahmed at first. He admired her from a distance, watching her come to the well day after day, her steps light and purposeful as she filled her pot. Ahmed found himself drawn to her beauty and the way she seemed to carry herself with dignity. Yet he knew she was off limits. She had a husband, a family, and a life that didn't include him. But the more Ahmed saw her, the more he became obsessed. He began thinking about her constantly, imagining ways to get closer to her. He knew he couldn't just approach her directly, so he started looking for small ways to interact with her. Simple exchanges, casual conversations about the weather or the water supply. He hoped that these small gestures might lead to something more, but no matter how much he tried, she always kept her distance, polite but uninterested. She didn't seem to notice the effect she had on him. One day, the woman's son came to the well to fetch water for his mother. When the boy tried to lift the heavy water pot, Ahmed refused to give him the water, saying the boy was too small to carry such a burden. He sent him away, telling him that only his mother could come to fetch the water. It was a clear excuse, a way for Ahmed to get closer to the woman. But even then, she didn't seem to take notice. Despite his efforts, Ahmed couldn't get the woman out of his mind. He longed for her attention, wishing she would see him as more than just a well worker. However, the woman remained indifferent, bound by her loyalty to her husband and her role as a mother. To her, Ahmed was just another man in the village, nothing more, nothing less. To her, the well was a place to fetch water, not to entertain unwanted advances. Still, Ahmed's obsession grew, and he began plotting ways to gain her attention, unaware that his actions would soon lead him into a trap set by the very woman he was trying to woo. One day, as Ahmed was going about his daily duties at the well, he saw the woman's son approach to fetch water for his mother. The boy, though strong for his age, was still young, and the large water pot he tried to carry was clearly too heavy for him. Ahmed, always looking for ways to assert control, decided this was the perfect opportunity to further his own desires. Instead of helping the boy, he told him that he was too small to carry such a heavy pot. He ordered him to go back and send his mother instead. "You are too small," Ahmed said dismissively. "Your mother must come and carry the water herself." The boy, confused and disappointed, left without protest, returning home to tell his mother what had happened. The woman, though upset by the situation, knew that Ahmed had a reputation for being difficult. Still, she didn't think much of it at the time. She was focused on taking care of her family, not on the whims of a man at the well. But for Ahmed, this small encounter became more than just a brief interaction. It became an excuse to further his interest in the woman. He had seen an opening, a moment where he could manipulate the situation to get closer to her. Instead of seeing the boy's difficulty as an opportunity to show kindness, he had seen it as a chance to put himself in the woman's path, to make her aware of his presence, and perhaps his power over her life. It was clear to Ahmed that the woman, despite being married, was still someone he could pursue. She had a son, which meant she needed help, and he knew that he could be the one to offer that help, even though his true intentions were far from altruistic. In his mind, helping her meant being closer to her, creating a bond between them that didn't exist. He saw the boy's struggle as an excuse to involve her more in his life, to make himself indispensable. But the woman wasn't blind to his intentions. She had seen how Ahmed had acted, and she understood what he was trying to do. She knew he was not really interested in helping, but in manipulating the situation to gain favor with her. Even though Ahmed thought he was being clever, he was only revealing his true nature as a man who used his position and influence to pursue his desires. What he didn't realize was that the woman was already aware of his game and would soon find a way to turn the tables on him. The woman, though initially unsure of how to handle Ahmed's advances, eventually decided to tell her husband about the situation. One evening, after she had returned home from the well, she shared the encounter with him. She explained how Ahmed had been persistently kind, but in a way that felt inappropriate, and how he had made it clear that he was interested in more than just a simple conversation. "What should I do?" she asked her husband. "I don't want to meet him secretly, but if I refuse, what if he becomes angry? What if he causes trouble for us? People might find out, and there will be a scandal. I don't want that." Her husband listened carefully, understanding her concerns. He knew that Ahmed had a reputation for being tricky, and he didn't want his wife to be caught in any difficult situation. After a long discussion, they came up with a plan to deal with Ahmed once and for all. They would use his obsession against him. The woman was clever, and she knew that Ahmed's desire for her could be turned into an advantage. Instead of rejecting him outright, which might have provoked him, she would subtly encourage him while also controlling the situation. The key was to make Ahmed believe he was getting closer to his goal, while secretly setting a trap to stop him from causing trouble in their lives. The next morning, she returned to the well, where Ahmed was waiting as usual. When she saw him, she smiled and spoke to him as if nothing was wrong. Ahmed, eager and full of expectation, immediately began talking to her about how he had been thinking of her all night. "I can't meet you here today," she told him, pretending to be cautious. "People pass by all the time. Someone might see us and tell my husband. That could be dangerous. But I have a better plan." She went on to tell him that her husband would be leaving the village for the day. "Come to my house tonight after your evening prayers," she suggested, acting like it was an invitation she was giving out of affection. Ahmed, delighted, felt certain that his love had been reciprocated. But as he walked away, he began to wonder how to explain his absence to his wife. He didn't want to raise any suspicions, so he quickly came up with a story that he hoped would convince her. He had been in such a rush to meet the woman that he hadn't even realized how far he was willing to go to keep up the act. What he didn't know was that the woman was already 2 steps ahead, ready to outsmart him and turn his own obsession into his downfall. Ahmed, eager to meet the woman and act on his desires, quickly began to plan his evening. He had to figure out a way to explain his absence to his wife, who would certainly be curious if he left the house unexpectedly. Ned was used to controlling situations and deceiving others. But this time, he needed a story that would satisfy his wife's suspicions while giving him the freedom to meet the woman. He decided to use his supposed religious duties as an excuse. "I met some friends today," he told his wife, hoping she would believe him. "We were discussing some very difficult verses from the Quran. They want to study them tonight, and they need my help. They think I'm a scholar, a sheikh, and they've asked for my assistance." His wife, pleased that he was helping others with his supposed wisdom, agreed without hesitation. "That's good," she said. "If you want to study the Quran with your friends, of course you must go. It's important." Ahmed, feeling relieved, quickly finished his dinner and said his evening prayers before rushing off to meet the woman. He was confident that his wife would think nothing more of his sudden departure. He wasn't worried about her. His focus was entirely on the woman and what he believed would be a secret meeting that would bring them closer. When he arrived at the woman's house, his heart raced. The door opened, and she greeted him with a warm smile. She was dressed in a beautiful, flowing gown, which made Ahmed even more eager. He couldn't wait to sit with her and finally speak without the usual constraints of public life. But the woman, ever calm and strategic, welcomed him inside, offering him tea and making small talk, all the while thinking carefully about the situation. She then excused herself to lock the door. Ahmed, oblivious to her plan, sat back and smiled, thinking everything was going according to his desires. What he didn't know was that the woman's husband had already anticipated this moment. He was watching from behind the house, listening for any signs that the door had been locked, which would signal that Ahmed had entered. When the husband finally heard the lock turn, he knew it was time to act. He quickly ran to the door and knocked loudly, calling for his wife. "Wife, open the door. It's me, your husband. I've come home early." Ahmed, startled and frightened, jumped up in panic. He could feel the walls closing in. If the husband found him here, his life would be in danger. What was he to do? As the situation quickly spiraled out of control, the woman, thinking on her feet, came up with a plan that would save Ahmed's skin and make him realize how easily he had been fooled. As the husband pounded on the door, calling for his wife, Ahmed's heart began to race. He could hear the urgency in the man's voice, and the realization of the danger he was in hit him all at once. His mind raced as he tried to think of a way out. If the husband found him in the house, there would be no telling what would happen. Ahmed could be killed, or at the very least, severely punished. His desire to meet the woman had led him into a trap, and now he was desperately trying to escape. Ahmed's panic quickly turned to fear, and he turned to the woman for help. "What do we do?" he whispered urgently. "If he sees me, he'll kill me. I have to get out of here." The woman, however, was calm. She had been expecting this moment and already had a solution in mind. Without wasting any time, she quickly opened her chest and pulled out one of her dresses. "Put this on," she said quickly, tossing it to him. "My husband will think you're a woman, and he'll never suspect you." Ahmed hesitated for a moment, but then the sound of the husband's knocks grew louder. With no better option, he grabbed the dress and quickly changed. He pulled the fabric over his head and tied the dress around his waist, trying to look as much like a woman as possible. But as he did, he couldn't help but feel embarrassed. He was supposed to be a holy man, a respected sheik, but now he was wearing a woman's dress to escape an awkward situation. The woman opened the door, and the husband stepped inside. He was carrying a sack of maize in his arms, and as he entered the room, he looked around, confused. "Why have you locked the door?" he asked. "What's going on?" The woman, acting as if everything was perfectly normal, greeted her husband and quickly made up a story. "I was just getting some help with the chores," she said, trying to hide her nervousness. "This girl was kind enough to help me." The husband, seeing Ahmed dressed in the woman's clothes, didn't seem to suspect anything. He thought nothing of it. "Oh, that's good," he said. With a smile, "This girl can help you with the maize. It's too much for just you." With that, Ahmed was forced to sit down and begin grinding the maize. He felt humiliated, his thoughts distracted as he pounded the maize over and over again, wishing the situation would end. He couldn't help but wonder how he had ended up in such a ridiculous position. The sack of maize felt like it would never end. But finally, after what seemed like hours, the husband handed him some money and said, "You can go now." Ahmed, relieved but embarrassed, quickly grabbed the money and fled. He couldn't believe what had just happened, how his desire for the woman had led him into such a ridiculous and humiliating situation. He ran home, hoping no one would notice him, his mind racing as he thought of how he could explain what had just happened. But little did he know, the woman and her husband were already laughing at how easily they had tricked him. When Ahmed returned home, he was still reeling from the events at the woman's house. His heart was pounding in his chest, and his mind was racing with questions. He couldn't believe what had just happened. He had gone to meet the woman, thinking he was about to win her over, only to find himself in an absurd and humiliating situation. Now, as he walked through the door of his own home, he had to come up with an explanation for his strange behavior. He couldn't let his wife know what had really happened. He had to find a way to spin this. His wife immediately noticed something was off. "Why are you wearing a woman's dress?" she asked, shocked by his appearance. She had expected him to return from his Quran study session as usual, but instead she found him dressed in the most unusual and unexpected way. Ahmed, panicking but trying to remain composed, quickly searched for a convincing story. His mind scrambled for an explanation that would not only justify his appearance, but also make it seem like it was all part of some grand plan. He didn't want to lose face in front of his wife, especially after everything that had just happened. "Well," he began, trying to sound calm, "I was discussing some very difficult verses from the Quran with my friends, as I told you. But something strange happened during our meeting." He paused for a moment, gauging his wife's reaction. "Suddenly, Satan appeared and began to attack us, beating us with a large stick. It was terrifying." His wife looked at him, wide-eyed, but Ahmed pressed on with his story. "I was lucky," he continued. "I noticed this dress on the mat nearby. Without thinking, I put it on, and when Satan saw me dressed as a woman,
He stopped attacking me. He didn't want to beat a woman. It was too shameful for him. So, I escaped and ran away. His wife, though shocked, seemed to believe his bizarre story. That was very clever, she said, still processing everything. You're a wonderful man, husband. Not only do you know all the difficult verses in the Quran, but you were able to outsmart Satan himself.
Ahmed, relieved that his wife had bought his explanation, sighed inwardly. He had gotten away with it, at least for now. But as he sat down to reflect on the evening's events, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of shame. He had lied, humiliated himself, and allowed his obsession to lead him down a ridiculous path. He had thought of himself as a clever man, but in reality, he had been outwitted by the very woman he had tried to manipulate. The next day, when he returned to the well, he had no desire to continue his pursuit of the woman. He had been thoroughly embarrassed, and the thought of pounding maize for hours again was enough to make him reconsider his actions. The woman had turned the tables on him in a way he hadn't expected. But little did he know, she and her husband were already laughing, knowing that they had successfully outsmarted him. The following day, when Ahmed returned to the well, he could feel the weight of what had happened the night before. He was no longer filled with the same desire to meet the woman. The absurdity and humiliation of his situation had completely cooled his once intense obsession. His mind kept returning to the events that unfolded, the deception, the escape, and how he had been so easily manipulated. The woman's cleverness had completely deflated his confidence, and he realized how foolish he had been to believe he could outsmart her. When the woman arrived at the well, she smiled at him. But there was no longer any excitement in Ahmed's heart. He didn't return her smile with the same eagerness he once had. He had learned his lesson the hard way. In his pursuit of something he shouldn't have desired, he had been outwitted, made a fool of, and humiliated in front of everyone. He had put so much energy into a plan based on deceit, but the woman and her husband had turned the tables on him, showing him the power of patience and cleverness over selfish manipulation. As he stood there, quietly pulling water from the well, he thought about how his actions had led him to a dead end. What he had believed to be a clever plan was nothing more than a selfish pursuit that only ended in disappointment. The woman, wise and composed, had taught him a valuable lesson without even intending to. She had seen through his false facade, and in the end, she had outsmarted him without ever compromising her integrity. The truth about Ahmed's life began to settle in his mind. His reputation as a holy man had been built on lies, and he had been using his position to manipulate others. He realized now that his pursuit of the woman had been a distraction, a momentary lapse in judgment that left him questioning who he really was. He had lost sight of his true purpose in life, his faith, his role in the community, and his own dignity. Instead, he had become a character in a story of deception, which only led to his own downfall. In life, we often find ourselves chasing after things or people that we believe will bring us happiness or fulfillment. However, like Ahmed, we can become blinded by our desires, only to find that what we sought leads us down a path of disappointment and regret. The woman's actions remind us of the importance of wisdom, self-control, and integrity. We must be careful not to allow our impulses to guide us, especially when it comes to our relationships and personal values. In the end, staying true to who we are and acting with integrity is the only way to avoid the traps of manipulation and deceit and to find peace in our hearts.